Evangeline Morin didn't introduce herself when she walked into the boardroom. She didn't need to. She set her portfolio flat on the table, pulled out the chair closest to the door. Not the head, not the center, the chair closest to the door, the one nobody wanted, and sat down with the particular stillness of someone who had learned, over a very long time, that the people who announced themselves loudest were usually the ones with the least to say. The man across the table didn't look up. Sebastien Voss was signing off on something, his pen moving with the kind of controlled authority that people spend decades practicing in front of mirrors. His firm, Voss Capital Partners, occupied the top 2 floors of a glass tower on Bay Street in Toronto, and it had the feeling of a place designed not to welcome anyone but to make them understand immediately where they stood. The carpet was the color of slate. The art on the walls cost more than most people's first homes. The silence was deliberate. He finally looked up. She was perhaps 38, no jewelry, a jacket that was well made but not new. She had the kind of face that didn't give things away. Not cold, not closed, just careful. She looked back at him the way someone looks at a painting they've seen before and are deciding whether they still find it interesting. "You're the contract analyst," Sebastien said. "I am," Evangeline said. "Not yes, not that's correct, just I am." He held her gaze for half a second longer than he intended to. Then he returned to his document. What Sebastien Voss did not know, what he had no reason to suspect, was that the woman sitting 3 feet from him, hired through a mid-tier staffing agency on a 6-week contract, was the same woman whose career he had effectively ended 7 years ago. The same woman he had stood up in front of a room full of colleagues and called unreliable. The same woman whose findings he had dismissed, whose recommendations he had buried, and whose name he had made sure did not appear on the report that had won his firm the Aldgate restructuring account. Her name was Evangeline Morin. She had not changed it. She had simply made herself irrelevant to the world he moved through, and then she had spent 7 years becoming very, very good. 8 months before that morning, Evangeline had been sitting at the kitchen table of her apartment in Halifax, a second cup of coffee going cold beside her laptop, a legal pad covered in her own handwriting to the left. The apartment was small but considered, the kind of space that told you the person living there had made deliberate choices rather than settled. She'd been watching Voss Capital Partners for 3 months. Not compulsively, methodically, the way she had always worked, quietly and without fanfare, until she understood something better than the people who were supposed to understand it. Her sister, Dominique, had come in from the next room and stopped when she saw what was on the screen. "Evie, I'm applying for the contract position," Evangeline said without looking up. "It closes Friday." Dominique sat down. "You're not serious." "I've been serious about very few things as consistently as I've been serious about this." "He destroyed your career. He delayed it." Evangeline finally looked at her. "There's a difference. You spent 2 years rebuilding after what he did. You had to move cities, I know, and now you want to walk back into his building and, what, work for him?" Evangeline turned the laptop so her sister could see the screen. A procurement contract, 300 pages of fine print attached to a pending acquisition. Voss Capital was closing in 60 days. She'd been reading it for a week. "There's a structural flaw in the indemnity clause," she said. "It's going to cost them $32 million if the acquisition closes the way they're planning to close it. I found it in 4 days. Their legal team has had it for 6 months. Dominique stared at the screen. "So you're going to save him money?" "No," Evangeline said. "I'm going to do my job." She paused. "And then I'm going to decide what I do with the rest of it." Her sister didn't answer that night. She put the kettle on and stood at the window for a long time instead. 3 days later, Evangeline submitted the application. The staffing agency had sent her over with minimal context. 6-week contract, senior contract analysis, immediate start. The intake coordinator had mentioned that the client was particular, which Evangeline understood to mean demanding, which she didn't mind. She had worked for demanding clients her entire career. What she'd found over time was that most demanding people were demanding because they'd been let down before. She could respect that even when she couldn't respect them. She didn't see Sebastien on her first day. Or her second. She was installed in a glass office on the 31st floor, given access to a document server the size of a small country, and left to it. She didn't ask for help. She mapped the acquisition documents the same way she always mapped complex files. Structurally first, then by risk, then by language. She built a working index before anyone had thought to brief her on what they needed. On her 4th day, one of the junior associates knocked on her door to ask if she needed anything. She handed him a 4-page summary of the indemnity issue. He read the first paragraph, looked up at her, and left without saying anything. Sebastien saw the summary that afternoon. He read it standing up, which was the thing he did when something had his full attention. He read it twice. Then he called the head of his legal team, a man named Franklin, and asked why this had not been flagged in the 6 months his people had been reviewing the contract. Franklin didn't have a satisfying answer. Sebastien walked down to the 31st floor himself. She was at her desk when he came in, working through a second tranche of documents, a highlighter in one hand and a pen in the other. She didn't startle when he appeared in the doorway. She finished the sentence she was annotating before she looked up. "The summary," he said. "Yes. How long did it take you to find it?" She considered the question. 4 days, she said, but 2 of those days were spent confirming it, not finding it. Sebastien stood in the doorway for a moment. He had spent 25 years in finance. He had learned to move quickly past the moments when someone surprised him, because pausing invited examination and examination invited vulnerability. He had learned that the hard way early on, and had not unlearned it since. "Good work," he said, which was more than he said to most people. She nodded once and returned to her document. He went back upstairs. The weeks that followed had a particular rhythm. Evangeline worked. She didn't seek approval. She didn't make herself visible in the way that ambitious people in professional environments usually couldn't resist making themselves visible. She simply produced work that made the surrounding work look approximate by comparison, and then she went home. Sebastien began requesting her on specific files. Not warmly. He didn't do warmth in a professional context, had trained himself out of it the same way he'd trained himself out of several other things. But with the precision of a person who had learned to follow quality when he encountered it. What he couldn't explain was the other thing. She had a particular way of reading a room. Not analytical, she was always analytical. But something underneath that. She would sit through a briefing and say almost nothing, and then at the end she would ask the one question that reframed everything that had come before it. She held disagreement lightly. Not softly, she was not soft, but without the performance of disagreement that most people couldn't help. She didn't need anyone to know she'd been right. She just needed the problem to be resolved correctly. He knew that way of working. He'd seen it somewhere in someone. He couldn't place it, and the inability to place it unsettled him, in a way he didn't examine directly. He filed it somewhere in the back of his mind and kept moving. He had a lot of practice keeping moving. Evangeline, meanwhile, was learning things she had not come to learn. She had built a clean picture of Sebastien Voss over 7 years. She had needed the picture to be clean. A clear villain required no ambivalence. A clear villain let her feel the anger without anything complicating the anger. Anger was a useful fuel. She had done considerable work running on it. But she watched him, the way she watched everything, carefully, without announcement. And what she saw was more complicated than she'd accounted for. She saw him stay past 9 o'clock on a Tuesday, not on a deal, but reviewing a junior analyst's work, with the kind of attention that suggested he was trying to teach something. She saw him absorb bad news without displacing it onto the room, which was rarer than it should have been at his level. She saw him take a call she recognized by his expression as personal, and she saw him step out of the hallway to take it privately, and she saw the quality of the quiet he carried back with him when he returned. None of this erased what he had done, she was very clear on that. But it complicated the story she'd been carrying, and she had not been prepared for the complication. There was an evening, a Thursday late, most of the floor empty, when she came back for a document she'd left on the printer. She passed his office and the door was partially open. He was at his desk, not working, sitting. He had a folder open in front of him, but he wasn't reading it. He was looking at the window, at the city lights spreading south toward the lake, and he had the look of a man who was very tired of something he couldn't name. She kept walking, but she thought about it for 2 days. The file came up on a Wednesday. She hadn't looked for it. She was cross-referencing 2 contracts, a 2021 supplier agreement and a restructuring memo from the same period, when she saw the notation. It was in the metadata of a document she'd pulled from the archive server, a reference to an internal advisory report, dated 7 years ago, the Altgate account. Her name was not on the report, it never had been, but the file path showed she had been listed as a contributor in an earlier draft. That listing had been removed in the final version, replaced with 2 names she recognized. One of them was Sebastien's. She sat very still for a moment. Then she closed the file. Then she opened it again. She had known this in the way that you know something you can never quite prove. She had carried it for 7 years with the dull weight of a thing that couldn't be argued because there was no evidence to argue with. She had built her career. Anyway, she had told herself it was enough. Now the evidence was sitting on her screen in 12-point font. She didn't feel what she'd expected to feel. She felt tired and clear, and something else she didn't have a word for. Like a door she'd been pushing against for a very long time had simply opened on its own, and now she had to decide whether to walk through it. She printed the file. She put it in her portfolio. And then she sat for a long time looking at the Toronto skyline through her glass office wall. She made her decision the following morning. It was not a confrontation, it arrived as a contract memo. She had been asked to review a legacy file related to the Altgate account. Genuinely, the firm was revisiting some of the older advisory structures for a compliance audit. She had prepared a thorough memo, At the end, in the appendix, she had included a copy of the draft version of the original advisory report, with the contributor list intact. She had not highlighted her name, she had not annotated anything, she had simply included it the way a person places a fact on the table and steps back. Sebastien read the memo in his office. He got to the appendix. He read the draft contributor list. He read it again. He sat very still for 30 seconds, which was an unusually long time for him. Then he called down to the 31st floor and asked Evangeline to come up. She took the elevator. She did not rush. She had been waiting 7 years. She could wait 4 floors. She walked into his office and stood near the chair across from his desk. She didn't sit. She'd been sitting all morning. He looked at her for a long time without speaking. He was good at reading people. He had built a firm on it. He could feel a room's temperature before anyone had said a word. He had made decisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars based on the particular quality of a pause. He didn't need to read anything right now. It was already there. "How long have you known?" he said. It wasn't a question. "That you'd see it?" Evangeline said. "About 48 hours. How long have you known who I was?" She held his gaze. "Before I applied." The room was very quiet. Below them, the city was moving with its usual indifference, all glass and motion and money and forgetting. Sebastien stood slowly. He moved to the window. He stood there with his back to her for a moment, looking at the same view she had been looking at from 31 floors below. When he turned back, something in his face was different. Not broken, not performing, just open, in the way that things become open when keeping them closed has finally cost more than the thing inside was worth. "The Aldgate report," he said. "Yes, your work was the core of it." He said it plainly, not as a confession designed to minimize, just as a fact. "I know," Evangeline said. "I told myself you were too junior to carry the byline," he said. "That it would have looked unusual. That it would have raised questions about how a contract analyst had produced the analytical core of a major advisory report." He paused. "I told myself I was protecting the integrity of the work." Evangeline watched him. "Was that what you were doing?" He didn't answer immediately. That was his own form of answer. "And when you called me unreliable," she said, "in front of the Edinburgh team." He exhaled. "I had a client relationship I needed to protect, and a narrative I needed to control, and you were the easiest variable to remove from the equation." He said it without softening it. "I knew what I was doing. I told myself it was necessary. I have not successfully told myself that in some time." The room held that. Evangeline had rehearsed this moment more times than she would have admitted to anyone, including Dominique. She had imagined it as something sharp and clean, a confrontation with edges, a reckoning with weight. What she had not imagined was this particular quality of quiet. She had not imagined that he would simply tell the truth without being pushed to it. "Why didn't you fight it?" Sebastien said. Not an accusation. A genuine question. "I was 29, she said. "You had 20 years of credibility and a room full of people who needed to believe you. I had a job I'd been in for 14 months. She paused. "I calculated my options and I left." "And you spent 7 years?" "I spent 7 years doing my work," she said. Her voice was steady and exact. "The same work, in different rooms, for different people, without anyone removing my name from it." She let that sit. "That's not a complaint, it's just what happened." Sebastien was quiet for a long time. He had the look of a man who was not accustomed to sitting inside his own failures, without immediately converting them into action or strategy. He was clearly trying to resist that impulse. The effort was visible. "What do you want?" he said. "From this?" It was the right question to ask. She gave him credit for it. "I want you to understand what you did," she said. "Not the version where it was a strategic necessity or a structural constraint or a different time. What you actually did to someone's actual career." She paused. "I spent 2 years starting over. I moved cities. I interviewed for positions I was overqualified for, because the alternative was staying in a room where version of events was the only version. She was not performing this. She was just reporting it. I need you to understand that that's what happened." He held her gaze. "I understand it," he said. And he said it the way people say things when they mean them and know the words are not enough. "Good," Evangeline said. "Then we're at the same starting point. What does that mean for?" He gestured slightly, at the work, the contract, the floor below. "It means I'll finish the contract," she said. "I do good work. I don't stop doing good work because the situation is complicated." She picked up her portfolio. "What it means after that I don't know yet." She left his office. She took the elevator back to 31. She sat down at her desk, opened the next tranche of documents, and started working. She had not expected to feel lighter. She did, slightly. Not resolved. This was not a resolved situation, but lighter, the way a room feels when a window has been opened that has been closed for a very long time. She called Dominique that evening from her apartment. "I told him," she said when her sister picked up. There was a long pause. "And?" "He didn't make excuses," Evangeline said. "He didn't try to reframe it. He just..." She stopped. "He told the truth. I wasn't expecting that." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to finish the contract," she said. "And then I'm going to think." Dominique was quiet for a moment. You've been waiting 7 years to tell him that, I know. Does it feel like what you thought it would feel like? Evangeline looked out the window at the dark water of the harbor. No, she said. It feels like the beginning of something and I don't know yet what. Sebastien, for his part, did something he rarely did. He cleared his schedule the following morning, not entirely, not performatively, and he sat with the thing. He was not a man who sat with things. He had built his professional identity around motion, around conversion, around taking a problem and turning it into an outcome. Sitting with something unresolved was not in his vocabulary. But he sat with it. He thought about the Aldgate report. He thought about the meeting where he had stood up in front of 12 people and suggested, with the calm authority of someone who believed his own position was unassailable, that Evangeline Morin's analysis had contained a structural error that had nearly compromised the work. He had said it carefully. He had said it in the language of professional concern rather than accusation, which was the most effective way to end a career without appearing to do so deliberately. He had known what he was doing. He had told himself it was necessary. He had told himself she was collateral in a situation she hadn't fully understood. He had told himself these things the way you tell yourself things you need to be true in order to keep functioning. He had not actually believed them. That was the part he had not examined in 7 years, because examining it had no upside that he could see. The damage was done. She had left. Life had continued. Life had continued and she had come back, and she had not come back with lawyers or anger or leverage. She had come back with competence. She had done her work and let the work be its own argument. And then she had placed a document on the table and stepped back. He called his lawyer that afternoon, not to prepare a defense, to ask about the Aldgate contribution record, specifically, what would have been required to amend the byline at the time of publication and what would be required to amend it now. His lawyer asked why. Because it needs to be corrected, Sebastien said. The lawyer was quiet for a moment. Sebastien, that's 7 years old. I'm aware of how old it is, he said. There was a longer pause. The original client would need to be notified. It would create questions. I imagine it will, Sebastien said. Do it anyway. 3 weeks remained on Evangeline's contract when Sebastien appeared in the doorway of her office on a Thursday morning with a document in his hand. She was working. She looked up. He set the document on the desk. It was a copy of the Aldgate advisory report. The byline had been amended. Her name was first. His was second. She looked at it for a moment. This doesn't undo anything, Sebastien said. He said it plainly without hedging it. I know that. It's 7 years late and the people who needed to see your name on it at the time didn't see it. I understand what that means. He paused. But the record is wrong and I'd like to correct the record. Evangeline looked at the document for a long time. There are going to be questions, she said. Yes. People will ask why it's being amended now. Yes, he said. I'll answer them. She picked up the document. She read her name at the top of it. She put it down. It doesn't undo anything, she agreed. No, but it's something, she said. It's what I can do, Sebastien said. I'm aware it's not everything. She nodded once. Thank you, she said. Not warmly, not coldly, just precisely the way she said most things. He went back upstairs. She sat for a moment. Then she called Dominique, got voicemail and left a message that said only, call me when you can. Then she picked up her highlighter and returned to the document she'd been reading. There was still a contract to finish. She intended to finish it. The last week of her engagement, the firm's managing partner, a woman named Philippa Strand, who had been watching all of this from a polite distance, stopped by her office on a Tuesday afternoon. We'd like to discuss extending your contract, Philippa said. Potentially converting it. There's a full analyst role that would be. I know the role, Evangeline said. Philippa looked at her for a moment. Are you interested? Evangeline was quiet. She thought about Halifax. She thought about the apartment she had arranged carefully. The clients she had built relationships with over 7 years. The practice she had assembled without anyone's help and without anyone's name. She thought about what it would mean to come back to this particular building in a permanent capacity at this particular time with this particular history. She thought about the document with her name at the top of it. Send me the terms, she said. I'll look at them. Philippa nodded and left. Evangeline looked at the window. The same window she'd been looking at for 6 weeks, the same flat gray Lake Ontario light. And she thought about something Dominique had said to her once, years ago when she had first left Toronto. You're not running away, you're buying time. She'd been right about that. 7 years had been exactly enough time. She didn't take the role immediately. She thought about it for 2 weeks. She talked to Dominique and to a former colleague in Vancouver, and to no one else, because she had learned over the years that most decisions were clearer with fewer voices in the room. She accepted it on a Wednesday afternoon by email without ceremony. She told the staffing agency. She notified her Halifax clients with the appropriate notice, transferred what she could, referred what she couldn't. She arranged to sublease the apartment. On her first day back, she took the elevator to the 31st floor, walked past her old office and kept going to the new one, senior, on the corner. With a window that looked both south and west, Sebastien was on the 32nd floor when she passed. She could see him through the glass. He was on a call, moving the way he moved when he was working something out, not pacing, just in motion, hand gesturing. Slightly. He glanced up when she passed the window. He gave her a nod. She returned it. That was all. It was enough. What happened after that was not a reconciliation. And it was not a resolution in any clean sense. It was a working relationship, rebuilt on the most accurate possible foundation, which was that they both knew exactly what had happened, and exactly what had been done to correct it, and exactly what could never be fully corrected, and that they had both decided to work within those facts rather than around them. She did not forgive him in the way that stories sometimes require forgiveness to look, completely, demonstrably, on schedule. She wasn't built for performances of feeling, but she stopped carrying the 7 years the way she had been carrying them, pressed close like a file she couldn't close. She filed it properly. She kept working. Sebastien, for his part, did not transform. He remained demanding, precise, occasionally difficult, still inclined toward motion when stillness was what was required. But he stopped taking the easy way when the easy way cost someone else something. He started checking the cost. It was a small adjustment. It was not a small thing. 3 months after Evangeline's first day in the permanent role, Philippa pulled her aside after a client meeting. The Edinburgh Group is looking for a lead analyst on their Canadian expansion, she said. They asked us to recommend someone. Evangeline said, "What's the timeline?" She got the file that afternoon. She worked on it the way she always worked, structurally first, then by risk, then by language. She built the framework before anyone had asked her to. She found a material issue in the regulatory language within 6 days. She wrote her name at the top of the report. Not first among several, just hers. She sent it in. She didn't wait to hear back before she moved on to the next file. She had learned a long time ago that good work was its own argument, and that the most reliable thing she could control was the quality of the work itself. Everything else was a question of time. She had already shown she knew how to wait.